I don't know which one of these stories to believe, honestly, but just in general, it seems like something happened that was either allowed to happen or not allowed to happen leading up for this Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski fight. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Kevin Hoop Show. Do not forget, if you're new here, real quick, hit that subscribe button. We're still talking about it. These two absolutely amazing fighters at the top of their game. We're still talking about them. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski. Who is number one? That is the question I'm asking you guys. Let me know in the comments before we start going into all the details and all the news. Let me know in the comments who you think is pound for pound number one in the UFC. The UFC thought it was still Alexander Volkanovski. Now, whether it was because it was at 155 pounds or because that just wasn't his division, I don't know why they chose Alexander Volkanovski. There hasn't been any really reasoning from the UFC of why they chose Alexander Volkanovski. I do think it's interesting to see that Alexander Volkanovski, who I thought maybe the UFC may have not been favoring as much compared to Islam, but I think it's very surprising that Alexander Volkanovski is still number one. After Islam won, in my opinion, Islam Makhachev deserves to be the number one pound for pound fighter. On the other side of things, though, Alexander Volkanovski went up in weight, looked really good. You can make an argument that Alexander Volkanovski won that fight, and if he wins that fight, he's obviously going to stay pound for pound number one, but Islam Makhachev won the fight technically. So why is Alexander Volkanovski still pound for pound number one? Well, I don't really have an answer for you guys. Only the UFC would. So I don't know if it's because of he went up in weight or because he didn't put his title on the line and it was Islam who put his title on the line. But Alexander Volkanovski isn't even ranked at 155 pounds. So I really am not too sure of why he stayed number one, because in my opinion, if he's going up in weight, then realistically, the person that is at that weight already, him being Islam Makhachev, should kind of have to defend that position. And he did defend that position and showed that he was better at 155 pounds. So pound for pound number one, in my opinion, should go to Islam Makhachev, if you're just looking at things from the rules. Because when you have sort of these types of situations, you want to go and look at the rules or go and look at what's happened in the past. Now, we obviously haven't seen a lot of people go up in weight or, two champions fight each other, and this really situation hasn't happened a lot. But just looking at things from afar, I don't see any argument that makes sense, to me at least, of why Alexander Volkanovski is still number one. The only thing being is that you can make an argument that he won that fight. Other than that, I really don't see why he's ranked number one still. In my opinion, it should go to Islam Makhachev. That's fair. I don't know if this would have anything to do with the rankings or anything, but there's obviously the whole entire controversy right now about Islam Makhachev taking an IV. Now, usually if someone has an IV, who the fuck cares? But under the UFC, USADA does all of the drug testing, and USADA has a rule where all UFC fighters cannot take any IVs in general. That was what the rule was supposedly been before this fight happened. And now Brett Okamoto actually looked into it. He has some tweets on it, actually. Now, coming from Brett Okamoto, who is an insider in the UFC, says, I sought further clarification, and here's the bottom line. If an athlete is administered an IV of more than the permitted 100 milliliters, as long as it's done by a licensed pro, it is not a violation. Even in cases where dehydration caused by a weight cut is the issue being treated. In other words, IVs used to treat severe dehydration caused by cutting weight are not really banned. So basically, that whole entire thing I said first about IVs being, illegal or banned isn't really actually a rule. So I'm not really sure why Dan Hooker came out with those accusations. Maybe he didn't know the rule specifically. But the reason I think Dan Hooker did come out with those accusations is because the majority of people's understanding of the IV rule was that if you use an IV, you're going to get suspended or, some sort of consequence. Now, one key thing to kind of take out of that Brett Okamoto tweet is that he mentioned 100 milliliters of that saline or of that IV being administered It was only allowed to be 100 milliliters, no more. We have, on the other side of things recently today, Islam Makhachev's manager actually coming out with a tweet. For those of you that don't know Islam Makhachev's manager, he's known widely in the UFC as, being some of the UFC fighters' managers, especially guys from Dagestan. For all the idiots out there, any fighter under the UFC banner can take 2 to 3 liters of IV as long as it's done by a nurse or a professional. Next week, I'm going to expose everybody. Islam Makhachev is the pound for pound king. I don't know if you guys heard that, but he said 2 to 3 liters. And then after that, he goes and deletes that tweet because he kind of openly admits with him tweeting that Islam Makhachev has taken an IV. He said that is okay. I don't see what the problem is here. That's how I take that tweet. In other news today, Islam Makhachev has come out and said it was blood that was taken from him. They came to him on Wednesday before the fight. So realistically, there's 3 different stories we have. We have Dan Hooker saying he cheated and he took an IV. We have Islam's manager coming out and say it's okay to take 2 to 3 liters of an IV. And we have Islam Makhachev also coming out and saying it was just blood that was taken. I don't know which one of these stories to believe, honestly, but just in general, it seems like something happened that was either allowed to happen or not allowed to happen leading up for this Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski fight. I don't know if any of these 3 stories or any of the truth to these stories has anything to do with Islam Makhachev not being ranked pound for pound number 1. It could be a thing. It could not be a thing. Only the people that are running the UFC right now know that, and maybe some of the USADA guys that are doing testing. Now, obviously, there was the whole meme of Paulo Costa's going off to find the nurse with the special juice. Obviously, you got to take some things with a grain of salt, and you got to actually listen to other things. But honestly, I think it's just interesting to think about. Number 1, why wasn't Islam Makhachev ranked pound for pound number 1? In my opinion, there's gotta be a reason. Whether it was because a belt was on the line, or because it wasn't Alexander Volkanovski's belt that was on the line, or whether it was because of this IV situation and the people behind the UFC knows what really happened and believe that it should have went to Alexander Volkanovski because of that. Who the fuck knows? Maybe they just don't want to deal with having to reverse the decision because, in my opinion, it just looks bad when you have to go back and reverse the decision. You don't see the UFC rarely ever do that, except if your name is John Jones, if you're picking up what I'm putting down there. Speaking of John Jones, though, you can't forget about Johnny Bones Jones fighting Cyril Gane coming up March 4th. That is going to be a great one, and I cannot wait for it to happen. Now, hopefully there's nothing, that's going to happen when it comes to IVs or substances with John Jones, which I don't think there is going to be. But honestly, I'm really excited for that fight. It's going to be happening March 4th, I believe, at the T-Mobile Arena. It could be one of the ones that's in Miami or something, but I don't think that one's until April with Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya. So March 4th should be at T-Mobile Arena, and then Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards is going to be in London in the UK. So that's always going to be exciting. Now, I talked about it a little bit yesterday as well, whether Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev have a rematch. Who the fuck knows if that's ever going to happen, whether it's going to happen right away or if it's going to happen years down the road. But maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons that Alexander Volkanovski is ranked number 1 is because they're going to do a rematch right away, which I'm all down for. I'm all down for a rematch between these two. If I were one of the people making fights, that would be the first thing at the top of my list. Just for the fact that it was so close. And honestly, I think even the one judge scored it really like 48-46, which I think was absolutely abysmal. I don't think any of the judges other than that one judge scored it that way. And I think it was for a reason, just because it was such a close fight. But if one of the reasons being that they ranked Alexander Volkanovski number 1 and not Islam is because it was such a close fight, I'm perfectly okay with that, honestly. Alexander Volkanovski, if you look at things from, a third person point of view, Alexander Volkanovski didn't do a lot to take, or didn't do as much as he should have to take the belt from Islam. Usually when you see a title fight, it's the person that is challenging for that belt has to really go above and beyond and prove that he deserved that win. Honestly, I don't think he did that to take the belt, but maybe he showed it enough to where, all right, I deserve this pound for pound #1 spot. It just wasn't at my weight division. That's the reason why. Either way, I'm really hoping that there will be a rematch between these two, whether again it's right away or if it's in a few years from now. This was one of the biggest super fights we've seen in a while. And who knows when the next time we're going to see something like this is going to happen. Shout out to both Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski. You guys have been doing great views for me on this channel. If you guys haven't seen any of the other videos on the channel, go check them out. All right, they're right there. They've been doing absolutely amazing. They're bangers. If you guys have liked this video, hit that like button if you enjoyed. And without further ado, we've got a watch party coming up this Saturday. And if you're new here, don't forget that hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. And have a great fucking day.